What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go. What is going on? Monday Night Football ends with the two-time defending champs dominating, destroying, obliterating the New Orleans Saints. And to add a little insult to injury, Derek Carr gets injured at the end of the game, has to go to the locker room. My guy, Jake Hayner, who, like Derek Carr, Fresno State Bulldog, comes into the game, but it didn't matter. It was over. Chiefs win, go to 5-0. I think they showed a little more life tonight offensively. Andy, as the kids would like to say, was in his bag, so we'll dive into that. You guys knew I was pounding the table for the Saints coming into the season to win the division and to make the playoffs. We got work to do. Don't feel as good about that now. We needed that Atlanta game, and now if Derek misses some time, this thing could. I don't want to say unravel because they definitely have some good players, but that 10-ish wins could turn into 7 really quick. And at the end of the day, Dennis Allen's their coach. So this was always a risk, and this were the people that pushed back on me. We also got to do a little penthouse, outhouse for the NFL, and it's actually pretty difficult because the AFC is a little easier. We got some big boys. The NFC is just like, is anyone actually good? Can I really put Washington there? We do get Washington Ravens. So if you are going to put Washington there after this week, you would feel pretty strong about it. It's a little different beating up the Browns and everyone else. But before we talk some football, I got to tell you about my friends, my partners, and the official ticketing app of this podcast, Game Time. And if you want to go to a game, any game, college, pro, a concert, a comedy show, get some laughs on, I highly recommend using these guys because they're the best in the business. You can search by event. You can search by venue. You can search by the individual team. Their schedule does not get any easier. You can go by price point. They got flash deals. I was just looking at it yesterday for my Texas, Oklahoma tickets. We'll find out this week if I'm going to get to see Arch Manning, which I hope I do, but I would imagine if Quinn Ewers can go, they throw him back out there against the Sooners, who I will be rocking for. Very, very fired up, even though I expect Texas to dominate. Haven't been to a game in a while, and if you want to go to one, here's what you guys need to do. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code John for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code JOHN for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price is guaranteed. You know what the Chiefs reminded me of tonight? Because I had thought long and hard about taking the Saints tonight, plus 5.5. And when push came to shove about 20 minutes before the game, I'm like, at home, KC, Monday night, lights will be on. They could be playing my high school team. This ain't the spot. If they were playing a 10 a.m. kickoff against the Carolina Panthers or the Jacksonville Jags, at 5-0, at 6-0, they're eventually going to lay an egg, but not in this spot. And I just watched the Vince McMahon documentary, and in the era that I grew up in definitely the mid to late 90s, I got into wrestling as a kid, probably Stone Cold, The Rock, Undertaker, Goldberg, Generation X, as I was kind of in junior high and watched it a lot. So I really enjoyed the documentary, and like most probably kids my age, when I was really young, Hulk Hogan was kind of a TV star, and he was one of the most famous, I would say, celebrities on the planet. And that entire business, like, it gives you such a different view. Obviously, there's a lot going on in this documentary. Vince got some shit he's dealing with, and he's obviously not with the company anymore. But just in terms of the business model, it's so predicated on the biggest stars. That's how the business goes. And it's no different in any of these other sports. Like, there's a reason Derek Jeter or Alex Rodriguez or Tiger Woods or Tom Brady or now Patrick Mahomes. Like, that's what pro sports is. It's reality television for superstars. And in football, it's always been carried my entire life by the biggest names and best players. And the Chiefs are now kind of fall under the umbrella of you put the lights on and you make the game big, we'll be there and we'll be ready. And their head coach, you could tell, like brought a little something extra. In the first quarter, because tonight they destroyed the Saints. I mean, obviously they doubled their first downs, they more than doubled their yards, they basically doubled the time of possession. That was an ass kicking. That was driving to the game. And during warmups, Andy Reid looks across and goes, "That's Dennis Allen and Derek Carr. I am going to embarrass these guys on national television in front of 20 million people." And that's what happened. And to me, one question mark with this team has been like, what are they going to do at wide receiver? Before I went to work for the Eagles, and when I got there, they had Jeremy Maclin and Deshaun Jackson and Shady McCoy and Brent Selleck. Like our passing game had LaShawn could really catch, obviously the two wide receivers. But like in Andy, what put Andy on the map pre Terrell Owens were teams with wide receivers that you didn't know that much about. And he schemed guys open. And he had Donovan McNabb, a really good quarterback, not a Patrick Mahomes, and a really good defense. And they were consistently knocking on the door of being a Super Bowl champ. Then he gets this level of quarterback, and the rest is history. But he's always hung his hat on. Whether he had Terrell Owens, whether he had Deshaun Jackson, whether he had Tyreek Hill, or whether he's rolling out 4 tight ends, as Troy Aikman said in the first quarter. He's like, I think Andy just had 4 tight ends on the field, elevating guys from practice squad, immediately throwing them the ball. His rookie wide receiver, which he's clearly going to be dependent on now that Rice, his knee injury is a little, up in the air, but I don't expect to see him anytime soon. What happened tonight? Well, they targeted Worthy 6 times, and they gave him a carry at the goal line, which he scored on like the wildcat with him and Kelce. So as time goes on, get ready. They are going to feature that individual more. Travis Kelce, he's old, he's washed, he doesn't care. 10 targets tonight, bunch of catches, bunch of yards, looked excellent. But the driver of this whole bus, really, it's two-sided now because this is not an offensive team, it's a defensive team. And that defensive line, especially the interior of it, was destroying the Saints. The guard center combination had no chance to block those guys. And I would say they're most like Pat Mahomes is the total showman now. He's very Favrean, what Rodgers was for a little while. I'm trying to think of, he's kind of in his own little category. Lamar does it, but Lamar, like some of his showmanship is just his incredible athleticism when he's running around. But like Patrick, he has a little, I think, he can hot dog while being focused and playing at a really high level. It's a unique quality, very small percentage of people can do. But I think Chris Jones, when you followed them last year, you went, yeah, he's picking his spots. And when you think about bright lights, and I saw it when I lived in the Bay Area with the Kevin Durant Warriors, well, after the first season, they're like, yeah, we don't give a shit about any of these games. And for the most part, they didn't. But occasionally you put them on a Saturday night on ABC against a big-time team. Once the playoffs started, that's when they would try. Now in football, because games mean more than these other team sports, you can still get up for certain regular season games. And a Monday Night Football game is pretty easy. And you saw Chris Jones tonight. He flipped a switch in that second half. He's like, yeah, I'm Chris Jones. Now that Aaron Donald's retired, I'm the best interior defensive lineman in the NFL. And whenever I want, I will be all over the quarterback. Oh, and I won't just line up over guards and centers. Sometimes I'll just go line up over the tackles when I feel like they're gassed or we like our matchup. And then their defensive coordinator, it doesn't feel currently, we'll see, Flores has to do it for a long period of time. Spag's been doing this, right, as the Chiefs defensive coordinator now for whatever, 5-6 years. In big games, in big spots, when he calls blitzes, there is always a guy coming completely untouched. And it's usually a smaller defensive back or linebacker that is moving at a high rate of speed and is going to hit the quarterback really, really fast and force him to get rid of the ball really quickly. And there was something late in the game after, they kind of made it a close game when it really, on the scoreboard, when it really wasn't. It's 16-7. Mahomes throws the ball on the goal line, hits his fingers, bounces into the air. The Taylor Swift guy, who actually played for the Kansas City Chiefs for 4 years and is a two-time Super Bowl champ, Saunders catches it, runs, was one of the cooler plays of the night, and then they scored on that drive. I mean, that was essentially a 14-point swing. Because you remove that individual moment, the game was a beatdown. It really was. And it started to me with the head coach who got pretty aggressive with the scheme because I think the Saints are pretty good on defense, and he was kind of running circles around him. Then he gets Kareem Hunt, brings him back. He's mentioned this to me before off the record. He's clearly pretty open about it now, talking with Troy and Joe about like, yeah, Kareem Hunt had a lot of issues, and we weren't dealing with him anymore. And we feel like he's matured since the last time we essentially just got rid of him. He went other places. He's come back. I thought the first couple weeks, like, yeah, I don't really see it. And Andy's got a little Belichick in him. Like, there'll always be one guy that you're like, how many rosters? I mean, like Belichick, the Patriots in their dynasty, best team in the NFL. And there'd be a dude on the squad who would play that, like, the other teams in the NFL would kind of make fun of behind closed doors because you couldn't do it publicly because, like, they're the Super Bowl champs. But, like, how is Belichick playing with this guy? And I had a couple people text me tonight about Steele. Great story. As we found out a couple weeks ago, his own family did not believe he would be in the NFL and scheduled a Sunday wedding a year ago. They didn't believe it. But now he's not exactly the Chiefs starting running back, but he sure as hell plays a lot. And he's always had a little curveball in the back of his pocket with a guy that most people go, are we sure that's a 53-man roster guy? And he's like a starter for his teams, who are usually the one of, if not, as they are now, the best team in the league. So nice win for the Chiefs, muscle flex, and you build up enough, right? I thought after the last couple games, it was going to be hard just to maintain this. But if their offense is a little more potent, Mahomes, to me, looked much better. And he's looked better as the season's gone on, just more comfortable. He looked really good tonight. I thought he was excellent. Like, to me, yeah, I know he didn't throw a touchdown. You could throw the box score at me. I thought the difference of him and Derek, who, Derek's average per year on his contract is like $38 million a year. So it's not like, and that's the thing with these middle tier guys. And I've known Derek since Fresno State, and he still has some good moments. Like, he made some impressive throws tonight. That interception he threw at the beginning of the game is, I don't know, one of the most, I don't even know what the correct adjective is to describe it. My jaw hit the floor. It's like, what was, I can't tell you how many text messages, I'm sure many people did too. Like, what was that? What was he doing? Like, well, it's not that big a deal. It's like a 50-yard punt. They drove right down the field and scored. That's how the Chiefs took the lead 7-0. And this was a game that, like, come on, Derek. Your team's got not actually momentum because you lost the last couple games. Now Atlanta's won. Tampa's kind of humming. Like, don't have much margin for error here. Now, obviously, he's injured, but you get into business with those second to third tier quarterback guys, you better be careful. You really better be careful, because if you get the wrong one, it can be a problem. And, Derek's career as we speak right now is kind of in no man's land, right? As a player, as a business entity, he's made and continues to make a shitload of money. But in terms of, listen, as someone who was a big believer in the Saints, watching them play these last couple of weeks against better teams, like, I'm not confident they're a playoff team, that's for sure. And I'm definitely not confident. Like, listen, I'm not the biggest believer in Atlanta coming into the season, but Kirk Cousins is a much better player than Derek. Like, the one thing Derek should be able to do that Cousins can't do is he's getting a little older in age, but, like, his athleticism and ad-lib ability doesn't really exist. That's one thing with Mahomes. Sometimes you'll watch him, you'll be like, God, I remember when Mahomes was a really good athlete, and he won't really do much. And then all of a sudden, as he did late in the game, he'll do like a 360 juke, make a guy miss, do a little Allen Iverson stutter step, scramble to the first down, do a Superman pose in the air. Like, oh yeah, this guy, he might not be Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray, but relative to the rest of the league, I mean, this is a big-time athlete, and obviously he can really throw on the run. He let a couple uncork tonight, like, don't forget, everybody. Everyone, I still got it. Sometimes you're watching Derek, and he uncorks it. It's like a moon ball into the air. Like, what is that? So you can't run the ball. They're going to have problems. They really could run the ball their first couple weeks. Everyone wanted to make Kubiak the head coach of like 7 different teams. 3 weeks later, they have not won a game since. And I would imagine most people are off the bandwagon. And where I get hesitant and why I understand the people that push back against me is ultimately you're betting on Derek Carr and Dennis Allen. And Derek has, I think, more moments. Both of them have positives. Like Derek had some explosive plays tonight. Dennis Allen's pretty good defensive coordinator, but you just need consistency. Derek can never avoid mistakes. He's already made multiple awful interceptions this year. And while Dennis is a good defensive coordinator, he is the head coach. So, and he just doesn't win a lot. And I hope we could overcome that with talent. But you saw tonight, like the Chiefs, it was like JV versus varsity. I would say 90% of that game felt JV versus varsity. And I don't know if that's more of a slight at the Saints or more of a compliment to the Chiefs, because if they can, like, is Juju going to do what he did every night? No. But, they've won a lot of games with that guy, and they feel good about his rapport with Mahomes. And obviously, once Worthy and Hunt and Kelce get going, it can kind of open it up for other guys. The league might be lucky that Rice isn't around, because if they got some of these other guys going, they would just kick the shit out of everybody. So must be awesome to be a Chiefs fan. It's what it probably felt like being a Patriot fan all those years. Hey, we'll do a quick penthouse outhouse here. I think the penthouse is relatively small. The AFC has some more people living in the penthouse. You already know the Chiefs could have lost this game by 20. Nothing matters. I'll say this every week, they are not leaving the penthouse to the playoff start. And I don't really expect them to lose in the playoffs either, but they feel like they're a lock to be in the penthouse for a while. By the end of this year, if they win another Super Bowl, they might purchase the entire penthouse. And then it's whether you just want to either purchase or lease the apartments in the building from them. I got to put Baltimore in, right? They've just started 0-2. They were leading by 10 against the Raiders. If they played the Raiders 100 times, I think it's in Baltimore, they win 99. This is the one time they don't. The Chiefs game, a lot of people go, it's 1 inch. I thought they got outplayed for a lot of that game, but they should have a Raiders win and should be just right there, right with Kansas City and Houston as a team that feels good about their number 1 overall seed chances. I stumbled upon Harbaugh today's press conference. He wasn't as down on their defensive performance as a whole. He thought, and he's right. He's like, Burrow was freaking incredible. The back shoulder or the back foot throws, he was getting pressured and he was still so accurate. The wide receivers made some great contested catches. But even he said there were 5 or 6 that are just unacceptable. And he didn't say this, but he essentially said, in a playoff game against Mahomes, in a playoff game against whoever is a top quarterback, we lose when we screw up those plays. So luckily it's only, early October, but that's definitely a concern. Their run defense is really good. But if you can throw on them, how did the Chiefs beat them last year? A couple drives, throwing the ball right to Kelce. And but if Lamar's going to play like that, hell, if Burrow's going to play like that, sucks to have Burrow just looking like that and be 1-4. God, that sucks. The Bengals job, that'd be pretty interesting if Zach Taylor gets canned, which I read something on the internet. You can never tell if things are true or not, that he was already being told, which I would imagine if they won like 4 or 5 games and Burrow in the offense looks incredible, even though he's technically the offensive coordinator, he is the head coach, that they would fire everybody. And that would be a job that a lot of people would line up to. If I was Belichick, I would I would play some calls. Houston has not looked great. Like they were a team that I like to be the number 1 overall seed. They're right there behind Kansas City. Play them later this season. But the eye test the last couple of weeks has been a little off. Lose Nico Collins early in that game after he had a touchdown. He looked good. They just don't quite look as crisp as they did the second half of last season. Obviously, a lot of pressure, little different vibe playing teams who are gunning for you two. Got to sneak up on some people last year, not the case. I'm definitely not bearish on this squad at all, but they've earned the right. 4-1, looked at their schedule. They play the Patriots this week. safe to say they're going to be 5-1. I think you're going to look up and their record is going to be right there with Baltimore and Kansas City, even if they don't look as dominant as those two teams. So to me, I wouldn't count Houston out. Buffalo, I don't know. I don't know if I can include you in there. They've been the last couple of weeks, obviously. But one thing I had mentioned when I talked to Colin about the bad game, I had on my TV setup, the Raven game was so good that I just gave it my biggest TV and I gave it the volume. And I put the Bills Texans game on its own TV as well, but it didn't have any volume. So and they're both heating up down the stretch, and I'm watching that game, and Josh gets crushed. And then I just kind of look up and I see he's going to the blue tent, and then Trubisky's coming in. I didn't realize until I heard some people on podcasts saw the clip today. I mean, he got knocked out. I mean, he was nights like that thing. He was sleeping, but that was late in the game. So if anyone wants to say it might have led to his back, he was bad the majority of the game, but he did get KO'd with less than 5 minutes to go in the game, which you could argue then is on McDermott in that situation. Also, as the head coach, he might legitimately not know that he was out on the field because a bunch of people are saying, does the NFL not care? Does the independent neurosurgeon? Listen, I don't know. I can't pretend to have been there, but you see the video, it's clear he's out. He's out. Now, I'm not going to go on some moral rant because, listen, I would never turn off the game. So I'm not going to pretend like this is unacceptable. A lot of people would say that. You couldn't pay them to turn off the television. So I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not. Like, I'm watching no matter what. And I don't feel bad about it. And these guys all know what they're doing, but clearly, he was out. And the rules are supposed to be when you get KO'd like that, I'm not sure you come back into the game. He was ripping some smelling salts, came in, and honestly, pre and post, whatever, after getting KO'd, he looked the same. It wasn't great. They were off. So to me, Buffalo's got some problems right now. And they definitely can't afford to win games if he's not going to dominate. Their just team isn't as good. So the AFC's just basically got Kansas City, Ravens, Houston. Sorry, Steelers. You can't. I didn't have you in last week, but I'm definitely not having you in this week when Dak throws 2 picks. I had forgotten this, but I saw the clip today. You blocked a field goal, and he fumbled. It's like, how do you not win that game? Honestly, how do you not win that game? So that was an awful loss for the Pittsburgh, given the turnovers. But is what it is. The NFC. I think there's only one team. Obviously, they didn't play great against the Jets, but you're allowed to have a version of a stinker if you win when you have been beating every other team in the first half by 35-7 on average. They have been destroying people. They had literally led going into the Jets game for all but 4 minutes of their first 4 games. And it's felt like every single week they were up 14-0, 21-0 before you even blinked. So yeah, they weren't as dominant against the Jets as they have been the previous 4 weeks, but you go there, kind of kick Aaron Rodgers' ass. Justin Jefferson was giving Sauce Gardner the business. Hot take, I think Sauce is a little overrated. He's a good player. He's a good player. But sometimes the way he's talked about, maybe it's a little bit of the region being in New York. It's like he's Revis or Dion. He's not even, I don't even think it's close who the best corner is in the NFL, and it ain't him. Now, you could make the argument that it's someone else, I guess, but to me, Surtain right now in Denver, much more fluid athlete. Sauce, anyone that can run good routes, if you're a long corner like he is, obviously you're going to give bigger guys trouble because you can, or smaller guys if you get up to him on the line. But if you get a guy who's also big and an elite route runner, you're not as smooth or fluid. So Justin Jefferson was open with ease all day, just like any high-end wide receiver who can run routes is going to get open on that guy. So you can't just claim, I'm the greatest corner of all time, or I'm the best corner in the NFL, is if you go up against another great player who is a good route runner and that guy gets open on every single route. Obviously, if you're a DB, you're going to get beat sometimes. Dion got beat every once in a while. Not often, or Revis. But just as use those guys, Revis or Dion or just players of that stature are just in a different stratosphere. Like this, is he a lockdown corner? Oh, tell me who's playing. And if that's the case, there was never tell me who Dion's playing. It didn't fucking matter. So I just think the hype on Sauce, watch him a little this year, not acting like the guy's a scrub. He's a high end player relative to his position, but he's talked about like he's just some first ballot Hall of Famer, all time great. I don't know. I would expect more if I was the Jets, if that's given the hype, or if I was a fan. But so Minnesota, and the only other team, I can't quite put them there yet. I can't. Now, I do think the Bengal win was impressive, even if their defense kind of got shredded, just to go on the road in that environment. It's weird. You get credit for a win in the NFL, but you play the Browns. If Deshaun Watson, mentally checked out, physically checked out, the team, how could you not quit on the guy? They got issues, and Washington took care of business. You win this weekend, you play the Ravens, and you win this weekend, I think we would have to consider Washington as like a legit NFC contender. And honestly, if you won this weekend, you convinced me like Washington or Minnesota. Like, I'd have to think about that one. The roller coaster of an NFL season is moving right along, and it promises to be a month full of tricks, treats, and of course, touchdowns. At DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, is the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Running it from the one or an 80-yard bomb. We don't care how they score touchdowns. We want to bet on them. DraftKings heard us and is delivering. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple, like a player to score a touchdown. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. Here's a reason for new customers to do a touchdown dance of their own. Bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use the code JOHN. That's code JOHN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. Okay, I wanted to talk about the Jets. The other day, like a lot of people, you get weird things on your Instagram feed. And mine revolve around food, football, golf, and dogs. And basically everything that is associated under that umbrella fires into my Instagram algorithm. And this podcast, I have no clue what it is, but it was a couple like legendary old school Kansas City Chiefs guys. And one guy on the podcast, the clip that I saw was Tim Grunhard, who was a longtime offensive lineman for the Chiefs when the Marty Schottenheimer, the 90s, and they had really, really good teams. And he was talking about the 2 years when they traded, I guess, was he a free agent? I guess they traded for him. Don't quote me on that. I wasn't even 10 years old then. But I was just reading on Wiki that when they got Joe Montana, he got like a 3-year whopping $10 million total guarantee. I mean, this is the most accomplished player in the history of the league at the time, and got $10 million over 3 years. So it is now at the time, $10 million in Kansas City. Obviously, it was a lot of money. Money's all relative. But the money that the equivalent now, like Rodgers took a pay cut. Remember, that was a big deal with the Jets. And listen, he did not have to do that. But it was like he gave him back 25, 30 million from 110 to 78. It's like it's a different world. But the one thing he talked about was the belief and the calmness that Joe brought to the table. He just kind of made everyone believe because he was easygoing. And the nature that he had when he got the way he carried himself, when he would get into the huddle that first year and they'd be in tight games. They won the AFC West that year. They had not won the division in 22 years. Now, they had some good teams in prior years, but you can't fake. One, it's about having a resume, and then it's about having a belief. And the only way you can get a belief into a guy is see him immediately do it. And I think one issue for the Jets is like Joe Montana got there and they were just immediately good. And they were already kind of decent, and he took them up a level. And that first year there, they made it to the conference championship. They lost to the Buffalo Bills, who would go on to lose whatever their third or fourth straight Super Bowl in '93. But like the Chiefs, I mean, this is a team not winning division, not winning playoff games. Joe Montana gets there, they immediately become better, and by the end of the season, they're in the conference championship game. And I think in a playoff game, he led them back like a historic comeback. At the time, they were the Houston Oilers. So last year, like this, we talk a lot about this with equity. Like Joe Montana didn't have any equity with the Chiefs, right? So when he showed up, he kind of had to prove it right away. It's like, damn, this easygoing guy, and he's Joe Montana, and he's good, and he's better than anything we had. Now, no one will argue that Rodgers isn't better than anything you had, but every time you watch them, it does just feel weird. And at this point in time, when you watch Rodgers the last couple weeks against good defenses, he does look like a shell of his former self. And whether it's just his knees getting banged up, he's been rolled up on a couple times the last couple weeks, he did not move nearly as well as he did in that Patriots game. And a couple weeks later, that Patriot game, like that team fucking blows. I mean, that has a chance to be a team like one of the worst teams in like a half decade. If you told me they don't win another game at this point in time, and I was someone that bet on them last week against Miami, but it was mainly short in Miami, like that's like a 3-win team. But listen, we've seen some 3-4-win teams. Like, hey, this team just had a million injuries, just kind of fell apart. And like, this is a 3-win team. I don't know how they won any 3 games. And you just watch Aaron Rodgers, and he is not the dominant guy that we just saw 3-4 years ago with Matt LaFleur. Like, we can acknowledge that. On his best day now, he's like the 10th best quarterback. And on his worst day, and you saw, I would say, a lot of bad in that Vikings game, he's going to turn the ball over. He can't control the ball on a pinpoint shoestring. He's never been Mr. Fundamentals. That's never been his thing. Of course not. Didn't have to be. I went to college with some guys that were straight A students that went on to own companies. I swear to God, they didn't study. I'd have to study my ass off to hope to get like a C. Best case scenario, B. So we're not all on the same level playing field. Well, who were 2 guys that could not circumvent fundamentals in practice, in training? His peers, Tom Brady and Peyton Manning, because they didn't have the athleticism of Aaron. So they played really one way their entire career, within a couple yard radius in the pocket, because that was the only way they could have success. It's the only way they knew. They could not scramble. There was a play in the Niner game. Brock Purdy scrambles around. They clock it. It's like 10 seconds, and they're like, Tom Brady's laughing about it. It's like, I probably never held the ball longer in one given play than 5 seconds. Maybe, because I couldn't. Well, Rodgers could get away with it. Until now. He looks much closer to just an old guy playing NFL football. And in the history of my life, most athletes that were late 30s, early 40s, that were like legends, when they changed teams, it did not go well. What Tom Brady did going to Tampa and resurrecting that place at 42, 43 years old will probably never be seen again. It just will not. Because you just watch Stafford. Looks kind of old now. Not like in a bad way you'd want to cut him or not want him as your quarterback, but like you feel is 36, 37 years old. Aaron Rodgers. I mean, honestly, his face, he looks like 55 years old. But movement, arm strength, not quite as good as it was a couple years ago. Still better than anything the Jets have had. But I look, because sometimes I forget, it's like, what was the exact trade compensation? Well, they gave him a first-round pick in 2023. I think it was pick 15. And then the pick the following year was a second-rounder, and obviously it was contingent if he played more, I think, than 65% of the snaps, it would have kicked to a first-rounder. Well, he rips his Achilles 4 or 5 plays into the season. It ends up being like pick 41, which I looked today. The Packers actually used that pick, trade it back, but that's beside the point. You traded a lot for a guy 39 years old, whose resume speaks for itself, is one of the best players any sport I've ever watched. And we can argue all day long, he'd let you down in the play. True. Sometimes he didn't play great in the playoffs. but sometimes he also did, and his defense was awful. But the guy that I'm witnessing now, I've been watching this guy since I was in college at Cal. I mean, I went to a couple of his games in college. And obviously, I didn't think he was going to become what he became. And then once he became it, I've seen him live, I don't know, 3, 4 times in his heyday. I was with the Eagles the year they won the Super Bowl. They played us in the first round. I think James Jones had 3 touchdowns in that game. That was as Rodgers was coming on the scene, like, hey, Tom and Peyton, I'm coming. Now, it turns out that would be the only Super Bowl he ever won. But I actually thought a couple years ago on one of those, I don't know if it was first MVP season or second MVP season. Might have been the year they lost to Brady. Honestly, it might have been the following year when somehow the Niners beat him at home. I thought one of those 2 years they were going to win the Super Bowl. Clearly, that didn't play out that way. But regardless, that guy, the guy from the McCarthy era, is so long gone. But then the older guy that resurrected his career with LaFleur in kind of the hybrid Shanahan offense, and he still allowed him to do the shotgun, spread it out, which he likes to do. I thought it mastered the position because he was so smart. He was so accurate. But unlike the pocket quarterbacks that like he could really move still. And it just kind of feels gone. It really does. And the Jets organization has to be on the list of bottom 3 or 4. I don't care who the coach is. I don't care who the GM is. In tough situations, and this is a tough situation, I'm going to bet against you. And anyone with a brain or common sense should. Why? Because history's on our side. So it's just hard to overcome the Jets. A lot of memes are out there like, you're telling me this guy tore his Achilles, laid on the ground, lost an entire season, and basically said, can't wait to come back to the Jets. Like, this guy chose the Jets. And Robert Saleh, Joe Douglas, you can remove names, put in, they fire both those guys, add new names. I would say history shows us that it's usually not going to go well. So Aaron Rodgers, not the same guy. But this situation is just historically pretty consistent. Most things do not turn out to be Tom Brady or Joe Montana. Most of the time in pro sports, basketball, baseball, and football, with these guys basically 40 years old, it looks like this. I wanted to play a little game. We're just going to call it What's Next. And then I'll just insert, whoever, a team, a player, a situation, because there's so much going on. It's like, I don't want to just do like individual. It's like, let's just play a little game. So this will just be what's next for the Browns and Deshaun Watson. And I'll rattle off a bunch of other ones too. But I wanted to start with this. What is next for Deshaun Watson and the Browns? First and foremost, this is easily the worst situation in the league. When you factor in the contract, the coach now being forced to lie, the quarterback who has this look like he's just kind of dead inside when you see his eyes, right? And then as an individual player, he is just horrendous. I even saw some new stats today. Obviously, him against the blitz is like historically poor since like the 1970 merger. His eye test of just when he scrambles around and just ends up in these hellacious sacks. And unless it's a dink or dunk, there is nothing there. And you watch some of these great athletic, and all these guys are different from each other, but he was in the mold of Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray. Lamar was always better than even Houston Deshaun, but just a guy that can really scramble around, move around, and be explosive down the field. All those guys, like the Seattle version of Russell, not the guy we see now. We don't actually see a guy now because he's on the sideline, which is like not quite sure what's going on. And they said they're going to go with a quarterback switch. I would not. Under no circumstances, I will just go down with Fields. I will not have Russell Wilson dinking and dunking me to losses. At least there's always a chance Justin Fields can just take off or hit a deep bomb. But that's a conversation for another day. But what is next for this situation? Because you can't cut him. Let's just hypothetically said they cut him tomorrow. which is not going to happen. But let's just use that as an example. I thought about this today. I don't think he'd ever play in the NFL again. He'd be like, John, how can you say that? We have seen so many, good players who had questionable off the field situations get second chances. That has always happened. And guess what? It always will happen. This capitalism and the best of the best, if you're better than your peers, we will overlook your problems. Because I think Doc Rivers said this one time, if your production outweighs your problems, we'll make a spot for you. Well, this guy's production literally outweighs nobody. He's the worst player in the NFL. I feel pretty confident saying that. Like Trevor Lawrence has played bad and has not had a good season at all. There is not a general manager in the NFL. There is not a head coach in the NFL. There is not a fan in the NFL who would take Deshaun Watson over Trevor Lawrence. Anthony Richardson, who we'll get into in a minute, is pretty big roller coaster, right? You would take working with that, and obviously he's a good guy, no issues, over whatever the hell Deshaun Watson is. I do feel very strongly if this offseason they were just to bite the bullet and cut him, because the trade market obviously is non-existent, I don't think we would ever see this guy play in the NFL again. So think about when you think, where is this team going to go? They are forced to ride it out. Who knows? Maybe 2 more years. I don't see it going past this year and next if he continues to play like this. But I do see a scenario where they just roll this out for the next couple of years, given what they're paying him. For a player, I'm not talking a starter. I'm talking being on another roster. Would not be on another roster in the National Football League. I saw some people today because Kevin Stefanski said after the game, he's our quarterback. Basically, got his back. Like, we're not benching him. And that was a huge hoopla on the internet. Put in Jameis Winston. It can't be worse than that. And that I agree with. It's impossible to be worse than this. Because you get this guy who has lost all of his confidence, who clearly no longer looks like a good athlete, whose arm looks dramatically worse than it once did. And he is just running back there like a chicken with his head cut off, just running into defensive linemen, getting hit like a pinball. Like it's an awful watch. It really is. And then you factor in the toxicity of his brand, given what he stands for outside of the NFL, that I just don't see a solution here. And I can't imagine being a Browns fan going, we're going to be stuck with this guy for 25 more games that we have to watch him. But why would it get better once this situation ends? Your owner has proven to be completely nuts. He really has. Like, Deshaun Watson is on your team because he simply got involved. He was never going to be a Brown, ever. Did not want to come there. And he said, we will fully guarantee every penny. And David Malgetta, one of the only guys who will support Deshaun Watson publicly and privately, of course he would. He's the agent. He's got his hand in the cookie jar on that deal. If I was him, I would too. That's most business. You look past shit when you're profiting from it. And that's what he does here. But this situation is really, really ugly. And you can't convince me Kevin Stefanski's just some village idiot now. I watched him last year with Joe Flacco. And there's a reason they didn't call Joe Flacco, who we'll get to next. Because you couldn't. The owner, I'm giving this guy all the money. If he wants to get rid of the coordinator, if he wants to, I don't want Joe Flacco around. I don't even want to risk the chance that, imagine if Joe Flacco was the backup right now. It's one thing with Jameis Winston, put Jameis Winston in. A lot of us could argue, like, is Jameis Winston even any good? I'm sure he's better than Deshaun Watson. That's a low bar. But if Joe Flacco was on the team, there wouldn't be one fan who essentially is your consumer. Because without them, none of this exists. That $230 million doesn't just come from the sky. It comes from the television networks who get it because of all these people willing to watch these games. The Browns have a big fan base. And if they're watching this It would be a mutiny in Brea, Ohio, if they would not put Joe Flacco in. So if I might even give them credit on this one. You could not bring Joe Flacco because we all saw this coming. We all did. So when you hear Joe Flacco tell, I don't even know who it was last week, Albert Breer or McAfee, like, yeah, they didn't call me. But he's like, nothing really surprises me. He's being nice. He knows why. He knows why. Because I'm watching what's next for Joe Flacco in the Indianapolis Colts. Because you watch them and you watch him and you go, he's the best quarterback on the team. He's really the best quarterback on multiple teams. He's the best quarterback on the Colts. He's the best quarterback on the Cleveland Browns. This is a guy that everyone was making fun of 3 or 4 years ago. And now he's clearly the best player for like several teams in the NFL. So I do understand like the difference of the Deshaun situation and Anthony Richardson. You take this kid 4th overall. And part of drafting him high was, listen, there's a lot here to work with. But we got to work with this. We got to mold it. We got to figure it out. There's something there. But this isn't just some plug and play scenario, right? He wasn't going to look like the way Jaden looks right now, or even Trevor Lawrence earlier on in his career, or Jared Goff, or just some of these quarterbacks that, like, even when they're kind of shitty, it's like, oh, I can kind of see that. Anthony Richardson is a I think he has the lowest QBR, Florio, which sounds crazy because I thought Deshaun did, but so far now he's only played a couple games because of injuries, and Flacco has only played 2 games. Obviously, replacing him has the highest. Flacco just looks good. He really does. And I understand putting Anthony Richardson back into the game. And I think it would be easier to just redshirt him if this was his rookie season. I'd be like, you know what, guys? Let's just take a breath. Let's let him sit from behind and learn, take notes, and just kind of soak it all in. But it's his second year. So let's just give him a couple more weeks till he's ready. Well, let's say Flacco wins a couple games. And that logic of like, just roll out Flacco. It's like, okay. And you can live in the here and now. But part of drafting the guy high was, 1, we believed in his talent, but 2, the contract. Part of the benefit of drafting a quarterback in the top 10 or the first couple rounds and then playing him immediately, if he's good, is that he doesn't cost you very much money. So they'd be all out of whack. And I just think you get yourself in these weird situations where there's no way they can say with a straight face that Anthony Richardson is today is a better player than Joe Flacco and gives our team a better chance today. Like Anthony Richardson against the Jags would not have given them a better chance to win than Joe Flacco. Anthony Richardson against the Steelers 2 weeks ago would not have given them a better chance than Joe Flacco. And I'm not anti-Anthony Richardson, though I've been a little concerned pre-injury what we saw. I'm still pro projects, high character, hardworking projects, which from all accounts, people I know in the league and just knowing the Colts, I like everything I heard about Anthony Richardson. So it doesn't mean they're all going to work, but I am a proponent of doing that as a drafting strategy. Sometimes you can't just fucking try to hit an opposite field single. Like, hey, we're down 3 runs. We got to run on a second, third. Let this fucking thing rip. Try to hit one off the wall. And I'm a fan of that logic and that mindset in most walks of life, obviously including football. But eventually you get some information. Now, we have a lot to learn with Anthony Richardson. I would say the one thing that like is kind of a fact is he gets injured all the time. It's like, well, the play calling. Well, I can't just have him drop back and throw it 40 times because he's one of the most inaccurate quarterbacks in the league. So I kind of got to run him. And it's like, well, all these quarterbacks are running around, no problem. Lamar does it. Jaden Daniels is doing it. Dude's running like a gazelle. It's like, can this guy do it? I mean, because if he can't, and he's always going to get hurt whenever he runs because he doesn't slide, which is also a problem, we got problems. And this whole thing is going to be a disaster. What's next for Davante Adams? I've thought a lot about this. One, to me, the Jets have absolutely no business trading for him. And if they were to lose on Monday Night Football to the Bills and fall to 2-4, like, let's just be real. This team ain't rattling like a 4-game win streak off. you're probably destined to be a 7-8 win team. So getting rid of a pick, which Adam Schefter reported, I know a lot of Raider fans. I have been around that organization and seen how passionate the fan base is. It's pretty special. It's a unique organization. It's kind of got this collegiate feel with alumni, with the history to this like I don't know, succession with Al Davis of being this like powerful patriarch of it all and just being nuts, but being great. And then they've had 20 plus years of just embarrassment. And I think I mentioned this yesterday, Charles Woodson's comments of like, why can't we have nice things? And this is not all on the Raiders. You know, Davante clearly, some of his comments I thought he made in the receiver documentary is like, like I could see being his teammate and being like, my standard is my standard, even if we lose. Well, you're just mad you got two balls, right? And you're a high character team first guy, always, I thought, but then you're bitching and moaning last year when you won some games because you only caught one ball. Like, that's not really how it works. Imagine a quarterback after his team wins, bitching and moaning that he only threw one touchdown. Like, yeah, I'll be happy when I throw 3 or 4. No one says that. No defensive lineman's pissed off after his team wins because he didn't have a sack. The whole point, you practice all week to try to win. So I'm not absolving Davante from this, but one thing I've heard out there in the grapevine is that I think the Antonio Pierce they saw after they all put Josh McDaniels in a guillotine, stabbed him in the back, lit his body on fire, and threw him in one of that Vegas lake where they found a bunch of bodies from the mob, essentially, which I don't even blame them for doing. He was objectively bad. And I watched a decent amount of Raider games, and his teams stunk. It was not going well. So get it. But you ride this Antonio Pierce wave. One thing I heard in the offseason, he starts feeling himself a little bit. It might be a little different vibe to him than what it was previously, which is part of it. Like being the interim coach, being the head guy, it's a little different. But here's what I know. I'm watching your team and you're getting fucking ransacked. Sean Payton just made you look like a JV squad. You can only hold on to coming back 10 points to the Ravens for so long. We'll be in Halloween before you know it, and that game will seem like a distant memory. So, yeah, it was cool smoking those cigars and puffing your chest out. If you played the Ravens 10 times, I think most of us are betting on them basically 10 out of 10 times. Yeah, you might beat them once, maybe twice, but they're getting you 80+% of the time. So I think when you look at this whole situation, the Raiders are a mess, are an absolute disaster. And now the owner wants to dictate the cost of what Davante's value would be. This is my issue with some of these owners. Like Mark, who's not really a meddler, but I get it from his standpoint of like, how many times are we going to trade a high pick, which they traded a first round pick for this guy, and now his value, you just tell me, is like, they give us a third and we give them Davante in a fifth, and it's essentially like a fourth. Well, it's like, well, the money, the cap, and that's the fact. Like, no one's offering us a second. He's 32 years old. He's currently injured, we think. But some of those comments aren't exactly like, yeah, I'll throw the kitchen sink at the guy. So I just think, what's next for Davante? I could see him being on the Raiders. I saw Antonio Pierce saying, kind of status quo. Status quo. You guys just, this is why you always got to be careful with these, the bad organizations, right? You see it in the NBA a lot when guys go to certain teams and it's like, this is really going to work. This team's finally going to be relevant. And like 3 weeks later, that dude wants a trade. It's like what happened to the Brooklyn Nets with all those guys that came through. It's like, yeah, of course. Like this is going to be a disaster. Anything with the Raiders, even when it feels like, God, you got Josh McDaniels from the Patriots, resurrect his career, Davante back with his boy Derek Carr. 2 years later, they're all gone. And even Max Crosby's having to go on rants about Michael Lombardi, how he doesn't want to leave and he doesn't know shit. It's like, well, Max, does feel like kind of weird right now. It really does. And the more often you get your ass kicked, it wasn't necessarily Max's fault. I mean, he's playing his ass off. He's injured. But, like, no one takes the franchise seriously. I think people think they can take advantage of the Raiders. And it's going to be interesting how this plays out. What's next for the Pats QB situation? I'll be honest, I didn't watch a snap of that game. Not a snap. And I'm proud of it because the game's irrelevant. It really is. And Miami without Tua is also irrelevant. But the Pats, as long as Jacoby's playing, no one that doesn't live in New England that does what I do for a living needs to watch them play. Now, the moment Drake plays, got to throw him on a TV. I want to watch what's going on. If Tua were to come back from Miami, okay, I'll pay back attention. But if you're rolling out Tyler Huntley against Jacoby Brissett, I think you'd have to pay most football fans to consume that. And it was broken, this not broken, but it was alluded to by the rap sheets and Schefter that, like, there's some movement. Might be time for Drake May to come play. Here was the problem with this logic of we're going to redshirt him, right? He's not going to play. He's going to sit behind the team. We're going to do some of this practice stuff where he gets 30 to 40% of the snaps, which is unheard of in the NFL. Your team was always going to suck. And it turns out you suck even worse. You have scored a total of 26 points the last 3 games. 26 points the last 3 games. I mean, they're not even averaging 9 points a game right now over that period. It's impossible to hold the young guy back because eventually the owner, who's old, and let's face it, most people, I can't even imagine the discourse in that area after everything that happened this summer with him like creating a documentary to bash Belichick, that people are going to want to see Drake May because that's the only way for you to stay relevant because no one can watch that. And I will defend people that push back on, like, if you're a Patriot fan, you don't get to just drop the team. But I don't blame you if you're just not really paying attention this year. It's like, wake me up if Drake May's starting a game. If not, like, I can take my wife to lunch if I have to miss a Patriot game. Like, who cares? Like, I'm not expecting us to ever just rattle off Super Bowls again, but that's not worth our time. It's really not. And it's not all their fault. Belichick the last couple of years, bad job drafting, but it's a tough watch. And Jacoby is an impressive guy as a human. Player, pretty terrible. He really is. Last but not least, I think a lot of people have tried to come up with these theories about college football and why it's gotten so bananas. Because I would say when I was a kid growing up, there were 2 or 3 teams, and it was like they were basically beating everybody else. You knew at the start of the season, like, unless there's a crazy injury, Nebraska, Florida State, Miami, with Pete Carroll, USC. I mean, there's always been a group of 3 or 4. It's like they're a lock. Well, back then, if you signed a guy to a scholarship and he showed up on campus, if he wanted to leave, like, let's just say you're Pete Carroll or whoever the best coaches are, even back in Nick Saban and Urban Meyer's day at Florida and early on in Alabama, I signed John Middlekauff to a scholarship. A year in, he hates me, hates the program, wants out. It's like, okay, you can leave, but you got to sit out a year to transfer somewhere. And it's not as easy to just transfer back then. There wasn't some portal where everyone got on the horn and started talking, clearly like now. It was much more complicated. So what happened? A lot of guys stuck through. And there's a lot of stories over the years of when I was a kid, when I was in college, of like pro athletes telling their story of like, I hated it. I wanted to leave. I called my parents. I called my high school coach. I called whoever was close in my life and said, I want out. One of the, you could argue, the best player of all time, Tom Brady. That's literally a story he had. Hated at Michigan, thought about transferring back to Cal, and he got talked out of it by a couple people. In 2024, Tom Brady, 0 chance spends his entire career at Michigan. There literally is negative 0% chance that happens. So now you're watching college football and you're seeing all these crazy games. Like, obviously, the best teams are still going to be the best teams. They have the most money. They pay the most for coaches. They have the most history. Like the Alabamas, Ohio States, Georgias, LSU, Texas, obviously now, Oregon moving forward. Like, they're not, Penn State are not going away. But I think the day and age of just seeing the 3-year run of Pete Carroll in the mid 2000s, the Miami runs of the 90s and early 2000s, like I think those are done. And I think on any given game with the transfer portal, with the lack of cohesion, crazy stuff could happen. Obviously, Vanderbilt beating Alabama is a pretty unprecedented moment and is not going to happen that often. But like all of a sudden, Cal's decent. They're 3-1, 4-1, and they're playing Miami. And now everyone travels really far because of this conference realignment. And all of a sudden, they're down 35-10 or whatever it was, and should have won the game, if not for really a blown coverage on the final drive that the slot receiver took 70 yards. But I think a huge reason for the parity, which is great. What does the NFL have? That it's like, I'm recording this part before the Chiefs game. I think we all acknowledge that I'm not going to bet against the Chiefs, but I wouldn't bet my life savings on the Chiefs every single game. And eventually, whether it's this year, whether it's next, they're going to lose a playoff game. One of these games that they've won 17-10 or 17-13 or 20-18, like one of those is going to go the other way. And that's the best part about football. We know it's possible. They can lose one of these big games in January. Honestly, it's like a lock to happen. If not this year, next year. They're not winning 4 in a row. I wouldn't put it past them to win 3 in a row. But regardless, it's football. Right? Think about the 2 Tom Coughlin teams. Part of the reason that they were in the Super Bowl is because they had insane upsets along the way, on top of the upsets in the actual Super Bowl. So I just think college football has always felt like it's really just 2 or 3 teams. And while the same teams are probably still going to be in the mix, it does bring way more into play. And I think that makes the sport way more interesting because the entire season now, because it's football and every game does still matter, even if you are allowed to lose games and get in. Like, I would look at the Vanderbilt loss, and I'm not just getting my boys back here. It's like 12-team playoff. Guess I got news for you. They could lose another game. Losing that game does not ruin their season at all. Now, if they lose 2 more, and that's one of their losses, yeah, then we got problems. But if they handle business and just lose 1 more game and they're 10-2 with Vanderbilt, now it might determine their seeding. Instead of being the 6th seed, they're the 11th seed. Okay, I don't necessarily care, but they're going to be in the playoffs, and that's all I care about. And then I'll bet on them then. But I think that once the playoff brackets start, and me and Colin talked about this, it has a much closer to an NFL feel, which pre-transfer portal, pre-NIL, you look at the Final Four in college football, I think the average margin of victory for that first round was really high. And those were just 2 games. And we were constantly getting blowouts. So the sport now just feels way more parity. Not just across the board, but definitely at the top. So where we used to have 2 or 3 teams, now maybe there's like 15. The difference of the 14th and the 2nd, if you get them on the right day, all of a sudden that team might win by 10.